In 1986, I was living in a luxury downtown condo and driving a new Jaguar. I had a holiday home in the Kawarthas and a luxury triplex in the Beaches. I had just been introduced to crack. By 1996, I was homeless during one of the coldest winters on record. The slide into homelessness was a series of moves downward. At each move, I let go of some of the trappings of my success. My Jaguar, my real estate, my furniture, my fine clothes, but never my dignity. When I left my last residence in December 1996, I moved into a shelter run by the Salvation Army. It was unbearable sleeping in a room with 50 other men only 2 feet apart. Even though temperatures were hovering in the -20s, I hit the streets 2 days before Christmas. It was the first of many Christmases on the streets. I moved into an empty garage, only to find that the students who lived there upon returning from Christmas break needed it. They gave me a little time, but I had to find some other shelter. I pitched a tent behind 197 Spadina. The tenants were kind and brought me food and blankets, but before spring the owner came out and forced me to move. I spent the weekend setting up camp behind 58 Spadina. When people came to work Monday, they found me living there. They bought me a camp stove so I could cook my food. I lived there until the building was sold in the fall. The new owner said I could stay, but his insurance people told him that I would have to go. I moved into an underground bunker near Spadina and Lakeshore. It was too damp there, so I moved into the spot under the ramp to the Gardner Expressway where Chris Gardner lived later. Next, I set up my tent in some trees on the Moonscape, the vacant land adjacent to the Gardner, which later became a golf course and is now City Place, a condominium development. Tents don't last long when they are lived in daily, and when mine wore out, I built a shack there. In the spring, I was again forced to relocate. They were bulldozing the land to build a golf course. I found a school bus for sale in a parking lot. The owner was asking $5,000, but when I told her that I was homeless and needed it to live in and could only raise $500, she agreed to sell it to me. While I was raising the money, I lived in a squat up in the steel girders of the Gardner. I moved into the van in the parking lot and began converting it into a camper. No one bothered me. When one of my homeless friends came to visit and did some vandalism, I was asked to leave. I drove to Bathurst and Lakeshore and parked behind the old Loblaws building on the corner. It was occupied by the Fort York Food Bank. They gave me permission to stay and brought me food and clothing. I spent my second homeless winter there, but in the spring, the police came and took my school bus away from me, saying that I was trespassing even though I had permission to be there. This action on the part of the police was completely illegal and was my first introduction to illegal police tactics. There were many more to follow. If people were aware of the illegal treatment of homeless people by the police, they would be outraged. I moved back to my squat in the girders of the Gardner and lived there until the spring of 1990, when I received 2 visits from the police from 14 Division. During the first visit, 2 officers tore my squat apart and scattered my belongings. After they left, I rebuilt my squat and gathered up my things, but a little while later, a sergeant from 14 Division arrived with another officer and soused my squat and all my belongings in gasoline. I watched from a distance as they lit everything I owned on fire. There was an article in I magazine about this. I went to Parkdale Legal Services, and they helped me to lodge a complaint. A year later, I received a notice that the matter had been investigated by the police, and they couldn't find any grounds for the complaint. They didn't even interview me or the other eyewitness. After the fire, I was so dejected that I just slept on the ground wherever I happened to be when I got tired. The police would come and rouse me up and force me to move on, and I'd wander away to find another place to sleep. I lived like this until I was able to get a room in Strawn House, a building of about 50 rooms, which was created to provide housing for the hard to house. It seemed a perfect solution. They had a tolerance policy for addicts, but the other addicts would hound me day and night in hopes of getting free drugs. I bought a tent and left. This was my first experience with revolving door homelessness. We find a home, and for reasons ranging from being driven out by other tenants to blowing the rent on drugs, to being hospitalized or incarcerated and finding there is no home to return to, we wind up right back on the streets. I pitched my tent behind some trees by Old Fort York and lived in it until it was worn out. I then built a shack and lived in it for a couple of years until the authorities found me and drove me out. The Toronto Star did a big write-up about me that time. I found a wooded area on the hillside adjacent to the Spadina Expressway. It was well hidden when I pitched my tent there, but when the leaves fell in the fall, the police came and told me to move. I found a rooming house and got off the streets again. But there were other crack addicts there, and within a few months I was one day late with my rent. When I arrived home, I found that the lock on my door had been removed and all my belongings had been thrown out. This was my second trip through the revolving door. I was homeless again. I went to St. Michael's Detox Center where I stayed for 6 weeks, eating, sleeping, attending counseling sessions, and getting myself clean and sober. After that I moved to Matt Talbot House, a halfway house for recovering addicts, and began attending weekly drug counseling sessions with the Salvation Army. I've been clean and sober since March 2nd, 2005. I had been on a waiting list for assisted housing for several years when I met a worker from Central Neighborhood House who informed me that I qualified for seniors housing and amended my application. I had enough of the bed bugs and snoring at Matt Talbot House and had decided to go back to living on the streets. I was waiting for my welfare check to arrive at the end of August. Shortly before the check arrived, I received notice that there was an apartment in a seniors building available. I moved in October 1st, 2005. If the notice had come a week later, I would have been living on the streets again and would have missed getting my apartment. I'd probably be dead by now.